This is my love letter to the Playtime shawl because a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a video... Hello everyone, my name is Natalie, also known as Knitty Natty, and today I'm here to write my love letter to the Playtime shawl. So this is my gorgeous Playtime shawl, and it's incredibly hard to capture this color in a photo or in a video. So I'm gonna try here to turn the lights off, the bright lights off, and see if that helps the color at all. But this Playtime shawl is crocheted out of the lovely Shauna, who is Farm Girl Fibers yarn, and this color is called Every Flavor Beans. So I am about to go on and on for a few minutes about all the details of the shawl, from the inspiration to how I got started, kind of the journey through which I designed it, and I'm going to show you a few ways to wear it, and then I'll share all of the details you need to know in order to make this pattern. You can find this pattern through the link below on Ravelry for $6. So if you are at all interested once you're done watching the video, definitely go down below and you can head over to Ravelry to get the pattern. All right, it's story time. Time to talk about the inspiration behind the Playtime shawl. So this all started with Shauna, who is the dyer behind Farm Girl Fibers, and she is out of Alpine, Tennessee. And I first heard about her when she did a trunk show with my favorite local yarn shop, Bliss Yarns, which is in Brentwood, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. And that's a yarn store that I went to as I was growing up, and I continue to go visit every summer when I go home to visit my parents. So I heard about her, and then we started chatting on Instagram and came up with this idea to collaborate. And that was actually several months before I even got started on the pattern. Shauna was very patient with me as my schedule was kind of busy and I wasn't quite ready to start the shawl. I actually did have an idea. We knew it was going to be a shawl from the beginning, and I was aiming for a crocheted shawl. Shauna requested crochet. And I was aiming for something that would take 2 skeins of yarn. When I think about designing projects, I do consider the cost, and crochet projects often are difficult to do out of hand-dyed yarn because they take so much yarn. So I was really aiming for, you know, sort of a bang for your buck sort of shawl where you still got something large enough to wear, but it didn't break the bank. So this is a 2 skein fingering weight shawl, which is still a costly shawl, but it is not like crazy. It doesn't take, you know, some knitted shawls even take 5 skeins of yarn. So I was definitely keeping that in mind when I designed it. So kind of going from there, I'm going to take you through the journey of how I got to this place. So I had this stitch like idea in mind. I guess let me start with the shape. I really knew that I wanted to make something that was a shallower triangle. I didn't want something that was equilateral, because what that does is it creates this giant this like giant triangle on your chest, because this is the way that I love to wear. I'm kind of doing it off to the side, but I love to wear my shawls as a scarf. And when you make them equilateral, meaning your increase rate is the same in the middle and on the sides, you get something that's like short, so it doesn't wrap well, but it's also massive. And that's what I was seeing in a lot of crocheted shawls, like just doing research on the internet. And I really didn't like that. So I was trying to come up with a new shape, something that I hadn't seen before. And that was really difficult for me because I am first and foremost a knitter, and crochet is something that I've been doing for 10 plus years, but it's not like something I feel like I've mastered as much as knitting. So it took me a long time to get the shape, but I had so many swatches. I should have grabbed them. I have so many swatches. Actually, let me grab them. Okay, I have loads and loads of ugly swatches. Some of them didn't make it very far, like they got ripped out really fast. But this is one of the first ones that stuck around, even though I knew it wasn't right. This is like a diamond. But this is when I was first starting to understand the increase ratio that I was gonna need to make the shape that I wanted. So I knew this wasn't right, but I knew that I was getting close. And then I think this was my first one that I was like, all right, this is it. So you can see this is sort of a shallow triangle. You can also see how much it curves up on this side. Just like in knitting, you usually have one side that's tighter than the other, and that's what was happening here. So when I first started out on the edges, I was only doing a chain 1, and I quickly adapted that to be chain 2 so that when you do block your final shawl, you can give it a stretch and it will become straight across the top. So this was like the very first piece that I was really practicing on before I went to Shauna's yarn. But I also had to come up with a stitch pattern, and for that, I usually do a swatch that doesn't have any increasing or decreasing, because I just want to get like the stitch pattern right before I start doing the math on that. So again, this was before I broke into the beautiful yarn that I had, and this was my very first pattern swatch. So you can see that there are stitches to the back loop, which create these little ridges here. That's just something that I have done on my other patterns, and I just really like it. It's easy and simple. But the real feature of this shawl is these crisscrosses. So I think in this swatch, I only have them going one way, but in the shawl, they're going opposite ways away from the center. Let me see if the right side. Are they going away from the center? Maybe they're going towards the center, but they're going the opposite way. So you can see that these cross here towards the center and these cross towards the center. So in essence, they're crisscrossing different ways. So this crisscross stitch, I have done before in a different pattern. It wasn't the same. It wasn't exactly the same. Like this was for a blanket. Brittany, who's Bee Hooked Crochet, does a free blanket pattern every year for Warm Up America. And that was the first time I'd ever been introduced to this, technique. And hers were quite different from this as far as how many you did, how you made the stitch. So I adapted it for my pattern. I don't know if this has an official name, but it is really fun to do. So these crisscrosses are really what make up the Playtime shawl. So once I had those two elements, my shape and my crisscrosses, I went to work with Shauna's yarn, and I learned really quickly that my two skeins, which I don't have, all I have left is this. So this does use up all of your yarn, but again, we're maximizing that purchase, right? Bang for your buck. I realized that with a hand-dyed yarn, I was gonna need to alternate. So I did some more swatching, which I then took out because I did it with this yarn and I needed it. I developed a way in which I could carry my yarn. So every 2 rows, I could alternate those colors. So then they would just blend together. My two skeins would blend together. So on this edge here, you can't really tell. Maybe in person you can, because it's a little thicker here than it is on the side where you don't have to carry. You can kind of see that. But in essence, what you do is you just do your chains with both of those yarns held together, and then drop off the one that you just used and pick up the new one to do your row. And I do have a swatch video for this that I'll talk about a little more in a second, but in the swatch video, I suggest that you practice that on your swatch before you do it in your pattern. But definitely if you're using hand-dyed yarn like Shauna's, you should alternate your yarns. So then that just leaves me to the border. And I knew that this needed a border. Now, this border is optional. You can definitely take off the border and it will still look awesome. It'll just have a nice clean edge and it'll still be a nice big shawl. Also, if you're running out of yarn, of course, you can stop the border, or some of my test knitters did different things, test crocheters. One of them did a contrast color for the bobble border, which looks amazing. Somebody else stopped theirs and did just another row of this plain pattern in a different color too. That looks really good. I think my favorite, most creative is somebody used mohair, like a mohair silk held double, and did the bobbles in the mohair silk. You guys, it looks so good. So, you know, be creative, do the bobbles, don't use a different yarn, whatever you want. But I was really looking for an edging that was gonna be fun, and I started going through Pinterest, just looking at different kinds of edgings, because I think edgings are really what give things their finished look. And I found a similar bobble border, and all I had to do was just adapt it to the right like ratios for this, because I wanted them to be really close together. Now what you're actually looking at is the wrong side of the bobbles, but the right side of the shawl. And that's just because once I started practicing it on this side, that's technically the right side, like the side you work them from, they kind of open up. And I didn't want that to be on the right side of the shawl. So what you actually do is when you finish, you stop your shawl and then you cut your yarn and then go back to the other side, like the wrong side, and just work it on the wrong side. If you didn't do that, it wouldn't be the end of the world if you don't want another couple ends to weave in, but it's totally up to you. So yeah, this is called the Playtime shawl because I was kind of trying to think of a name, and I was thinking of things that would represent the stitches. And I thought about crisscross and I thought about bobbles, and this is a time where everyone seems to be really into bobbles, and there's so many things called like Bobblicious and all the bobbles, and that just wasn't gonna work because all those names were already taken. And I thought about crisscross, but then I was thinking about like what this shawl really is, and it's a lot of fun. It's just like different kinds of stitches with a lot of rest in between. And I just thought of like playtime. Like this is like your fun time to like relax and crochet, do some crazy stitches, do some easy stitches, have a really fun border, you know, do whatever you want with it. And so I came up with the Playtime shawl. And then whenever I am working with a dyer, I always make sure like, do you have any ideas for this name, or does this name work for you? And Shauna was in agreement. So that was really good. Now, as far as the color, I need to talk about that because I actually got to meet Shauna from Farm Girl Fibers in person at Bliss Yarns in Tennessee a couple months ago. And she brought in several of her different yarns for me to pick. And at this time, all I had was this, and I think I had my shape, or maybe I was still working on my shape. I can't quite remember, but I definitely had this. So if you've ever like seen a pattern that you really like in a magazine or like a picture, and then you go to pick out yarn for it, how often do you want the same color? It's blue and you're like picking blue. So when I'd been working on this swatch and doing multiple things over and over, I didn't want this color per se because I knew this was a pattern coming out in the summer. So I wanted bright colors, but I wanted something similar. And that was all that was in my head. So it probably took me like maybe 2 hours to pick from like the 10 colors that Shauna brought. And I kept going back and forth and I'm like, no, I think I like, this is the one I was drawn to originally. You should always stick with your gut. But then I was like, well, I think it's gonna be too busy. So maybe I should pick another color, and back and forth. Oh my gosh, I think I probably drove her crazy. But eventually I did settle on this. And even a couple times when I was sitting there with these two skeins, she was still there. I was like, actually, maybe I should switch. I think I drove her. I hope Shauna still wants to work with me in the future because I was really indecisive that day. But it's an important decision because if you don't pick the right color for your design, it doesn't show it off. For not just for your design, for your any kind of project that you're making. And so what really helped me is I actually took a picture of this in color, but then I turned it to black and white to see how much of the different colors like stood out. They're pretty muted. and they didn't really stand out that much. They kind of muddled together into gray. So then out of, like, I think I had narrowed it down to 3 yarns. I took a picture of each of those yarns and then turned it to black and white. There was one yarn that really had these black splotches in it once it was black and white. So I knew that was gonna be too busy. This one actually turned out to be really similar to this one when in black and white. And that's what helped me feel comfortable making the decision on this color, which is called Every Flavor Bean. So, you know, I've got all these test knitters or test crocheters, I keep saying that have done all kinds of different colors. So on Ravelry, you can go check out their projects and see what kind of color that you would like. All right, now let's talk about how to wear the Playtime shawl. So I'm gonna be moving and sliding my chair and stuff during this. But of course, I always recommend my original way, which is triangle in the front. So you just put the triangle in the front and then you wrap one tail over the other. And I really like a shawl that can kind of bunch here, but it's not tight. And then it hangs down far enough that you don't have to worry about this coming off. Some shawls come up a little too short where you're always tugging on those tails. This one is not like that. You will have plenty of tails hanging down to keep things in their place. Now, the other way I kind of like to wear it is off to the side. So you just kind of angle it and then you can, you know, change the tails up. You can even tuck this one underneath so you kind of get that cute, like, off kilter look. If you really don't want the tails, I'm going too fast. Flip this up, tie this, and then you can even kind of tuck it more. Flip it around, and then you can let this part come down. It's all about fluffing here. And then you just have this cute little off to the side, or again, to the center with no tails. Now, true to its name, I just sat on my foot and that hurt. True to its name, it's a shawl, right? So you can wear it like a shawl. You can put it simply where the triangle is over your back and just let it fall down. It does come down quite far. So again, you really don't have to worry about it coming off. This is how I like to wear shawls when I'm just like sitting at night, maybe you're in a movie or something, just at dinner, and it stays on nicely. You can, of course, tie, which is, I do this sometimes. Yeah, this is like, I think it's still cute though, because it's not super grandma. I mean, it's modern, fun colors, and it's still really cute. You can also, again, be a little avant-garde, put it off to the side, and you can tie it. Probably should have tied it first, but you can tie it off to the side, and that is super cute too, where I just have the triangle on the side. I mean, there's all sorts of things. I'm sure you can like look up different ways to tie shawls, but the good part about this one is that since it is super long, super like narrow at the ends, you can do lots and lots of things with it. So that makes me love it even more. All right, now let's talk details and then I will sign off this love letter to the Playtime shawl. I am gonna be referring to my computer a little bit, so I might be kind of looking over, but that's because I just wanna get all these details right. So first and foremost, the yarn that I used is from Farm Girl Fibers, and the base that I used, hers is called Clover Fingering Weight. It's 85% superwash merino and 15% nylon. Now this is all that I had left. This is about 8 grams. So this is, you know, a little bit of insurance. I don't like to use up every single bit of yarn. I also had put a little bit into a swatch, which I'll talk about in just a second. But you will need 2 skeins of a fingering weight yarn. Now her yarn is 435 yards, so times 2, that's 870, right? So you need at least 870 yards. Some fingering weight yarns, skeins are bigger, some are smaller, so just make sure to check that. You definitely don't want to run out of yarn. For the border, I believe the border uses around 15 grams, probably a little less. So if you want to do a contrast color, you can use a 20 gram mini. 10 is not going to get you there, but 20 will be plenty. So that's the yarn. Now, as far as the hooks, I used a G, which is a 4 millimeter. This is my trusty Clover, I think it's a Moore. I can never remember. I love these hooks so much. But my test crocheters, finally said crochet, they used anywhere from an F to an H. So definitely make sure you swatch, get as close as you can. If you are in between, so the gauge for this, let me say, the gauge for this is in half double crochet, and it is 18 stitches over 4 inches. So if you are getting smaller than that, so like 19 on one hook size, but then larger than that, so like 17, then I would err on the side of smaller, just because you don't want to run out of yarn, and this thing is going to stretch out so much when you block it. After I blocked it, I was actually getting 14 half double crochets over 4 inches. So from 18 to 14, it stretches a lot, relaxes, and really loosens up. So let's talk about the sizes. So there's actually 2 sizes. I'm wearing the large. So there's a small and a large. And the difference is that you don't work this last crisscross section and textured section. So let me hold that out a little bit better. So you have in the large 4 crisscross sections, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in the small, you would only have 3, 1, 2, 3, and then you would work this texture section. So basically, this is so hard to do. I need a third hand. There we go. The small ends right here. You don't have this last crisscross and texture section, but you still have a border. Both sizes still require 2 skeins of fingering weight yarn. If you're doing the small though, you should have no problem running out of yarn. As far as special stitches go, very simple. We just have half double crochet. Then we have these crisscross stitches. There's 2 crisscrosses plus a center crisscross. And then of course we have the bobble stitch. So if that makes you feel a little nervous, do not be worried. I did have some test crocheters that were only kind of had basic stitches under their belt, and they were able to complete the shawl. So what I have for you is a video tutorial. It is available to anyone. It is public on YouTube, but it doesn't give away the pattern. It is a paid pattern. So if you are following the swatch because you want to test out the stitches and see if you can do them, that's exactly what it's for. If you're following the swatch video because you've purchased the pattern, make sure that you are following the pattern, because the pattern tells you exactly where to increase, how many stitches you have, but the swatch is different because it's a straight swatch. So let me show you the swatch. So here's the crazy little swatch that I have, and I had to use different yarn because I had already finished my shawl, but I would definitely recommend you use the same yarn you're going to use for the shawl, and then you can just take it back out once you have your gauge. So you're going to go through almost every single stitch, pretty much except for the increases. In this swatch, you're going to do your textured section, which is where you'll measure your gauge, and I give you a pre-blocking gauge and a blocking gauge, but you really don't need to block your swatch, just get close to that pre-blocking gauge. Then I walk you through exactly how to do these crisscrosses. So we practice it going in one direction, and then we practice it going in the other direction, and then we do a row where we go, just like the shawl, we go one direction, then we do the crisscross, the center crisscross, and then we go in the other direction. And then of course we practice the bobbles. So this is a really great way to just get through all the stitches plus have your gauge, and then you're totally ready to do the shawl. And that is also linked below if you want to go check that out before you decide if the Playtime shawl is something that you want to make. That's it. I'm signing off my love letter to the Playtime shawl. Love and stitches, Knitty Natty.